thank you very much for coming. It is digital report time. So before we get cracking, there's a couple of housekeeping things that I've been told I've got to tell you. First is fire exits are over there, just by the kitchen and the other side of reception. Don't really need to remember that, just if there's a fire alarm, just see where I sprint and just follow me. And then also lose around by reception if you are desperate and can't hold it whilst you're listening to my dulcet tones. Okay? So, let's get on with it. Just to introduce myself, for those who don't know me, which is probably everybody, I'm Harvey Cossell. I am Group Head of Strategy here, or whatever that means. So I look after strategy and media distribution here at Harvey Social. I've been here just over 3 years and enjoying it muchly. And I suppose part of the reason being that it's just nice to be part of a business that has been growing pretty healthily over the last 11 or so years, now in 15 markets across the globe, and just being surrounded by lots of people with an immense wealth of knowledge and understanding of social and all things dig. So that's who we are for those people that aren't particularly familiar with us as a business. But what we need to do is get cracking with what we're going to do today. So the format is, I'm going to give you the skinny on some of the global headlines from the 2020 digital report. It's 297 slides, so I'm not going to do 297 slides. Just top line headlines from that, then move into some highlights from the UK cut of the data, and then I'm going to invite the panellists who I will introduce in a little bit up onto the stage, and then we're going to have a discussion around some of the more discursive points that come out of the data that I take you through, so that we can understand potentially how we can act on some of these data as marketers with our brands. So does that all make sense? I'm seeing nodding heads. This is very good. You are all well awake at 9:15 in the morning. So let's get cracking. So the 2020 global headlines are thus. Now, global digital growth has been quite an interesting thing over this last year, but the thing I think we've all got to be pretty mindful of is the fact that the active social media users has grown pretty significantly, at nearly 10% growth globally, with 321 million people coming into the social sphere globally, which is a pretty healthy growth in users. And when you look at the most used social platforms, it's a relatively similar picture to what you see most years, but I suppose the thing that's worth mentioning here is that of the top 5, 3 of those are messenger platforms, which is pretty mental. And when you look at it in terms of mobile app rankings in terms of active users, again, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger and WeChat are taking 3 of the top 4 positions, which, when you think about it, is pretty significant. But when you then look at the distribution of those messenger apps globally, this is where I was pretty shocked by these actually, because when you actually look at Facebook Messenger, it's got a vice-like grip on North America. Obviously WeChat here in China, but WhatsApp everywhere else. But I think there's quite an implication there when you're looking to market to people in the US, because Facebook Messenger is obviously the lighter side of dark social. You can do much more with that in terms of communication to smaller groups of people, and so there's some obvious learning there that we can take forward. Now, when you look at global e-commerce activity, the thing of note here is that 52% of people have made an online purchase via a mobile device in the last year. Now, that's the first time it's gone over 50%. And I think there's a theme running through the digital report about the rise and rise and rise of mobile device usage and the plethora of functions that people are using their phone primarily for. We've just got to remember that as people come more online from various countries that haven't necessarily been online before, they don't go the route that most of us went, which was desktop, laptop, mobile. They're going straight to mobile, and that's obviously something that Facebook have talked about quite a lot in the last couple of years. But it's just bearing in mind that e-com on mobile is becoming more prevalent and is set to continue. And then the battle for the internet. We know the internet was actually invented for cats, but it seems that dogs have taken over, which is, I think, pretty sorry state of affairs as a cat lover. Who was a dog lover in the room? Shame on you. Those cats rule. So anyway, I just quite like the sucker punch there. So the fact is that from a global perspective, there's some really interesting data in there, and you've got 297 slides of this yummy data that you can peruse at your pleasure. But let's look at some of the subcut data for the UK. Now, in the UK, we have got a pretty healthy penetration of social, just under 2/3 of the population. Now, that's running slightly behind the US, but actually that's still that's a healthy audience that we potentially have the opportunity to talk to. But this, I think, is the interesting bit, is the fact that that's actually grown by 2.9% over the last year or so. The fact that we've got 1.3 million people extra in the last year, in 2019, a pretty tumultuous year for social, with fake news, with talk about echo chambers and data scandals and Cambridge Analytica, and then you've got cyberbullying and digital wellness and all of that. People are still flocking to social. Now, I think what this says is that whilst there is a narrative that is pervading the media about the negative impact of social media, the opportunity that people are seeing is one of positivity. So I think we've just got to put all of this in perspective and just recognise that there's a balance to be had. And people are obviously seeing the positive benefits of this and the positive effect of social. So that's probably why that is the case. And then when you look at daily time spent with media, the interesting thing here is that on social media, people are on there for about an hour and 42 minutes a day. Now, last year's report, it was 1 hour 50, so people are spending 3 minutes less a day. It's not a big drop, but it is a drop nonetheless, and it's something that we're going to discuss as a panel in a little while. Then, in terms of internet use, so share of web traffic by device. Again, it's looking at mobile devices. The fact that now, when it comes to web traffic by device, mobile is clearly in the ascendancy, and at that kind of growth rate next year, I'd be amazed if it wasn't pushing the other side of 50% of web traffic being driven on mobile. Now, that has implications not just within social, but within broader digital strategies. And we just need to recognise that we need to be much more mobile first in the way that we're thinking about building our digital ecosystem. But then it's quite funny, because I feel like I've either stood on this stage or I've been in meetings talking about voice for about 3 years, saying this year is the year of voice. It's definitely this year. It's definitely this year. It's definitely not. So the interesting thing here is that it's growing year on year, but it's still pretty small in terms of the use of voice search at only 28% of the population. I think it's worth saying that we need to keep an eye on it, and there are obviously applications and opportunities to use voice, but the adoption of it is much lower than you might necessarily think. But kind of hilariously as an aside, we are world leaders in the penetration of some form of smart home device. So at 17%, the UK is actually higher than any other country in terms of smart home device technology uptake, which means obviously we will get hacked and taken down to Chinatown sooner than anybody else probably. So, so that's in terms of digital innovation. But then there's this omnipresent issue that kind of sits underneath absolutely all of this stuff, and that is the issue of online privacy and well-being. I alluded to it just a moment ago. But the fact is that whether people are just worried or expressing a concern about their use of data or their or concern about what's fake or real on the internet and so on, people are also making active choices to avoid advertising using ad blockers and such like. The interesting thing is that this is running at 42%, which on reflection you think is quite low, but that's bearing in mind that this is internet users aged 16 to 64. When you actually look at younger age groups, that actually goes up to 75-80%. So that is set to continue to rise over the coming year and beyond. Who uses ad blockers in here, for instance? Okay, about 42%, that's excellent. 64-year-olds in here, this is good. Okay, so in terms of online privacy and well-being, it's just really important to understand that if people are really worried about stuff being fake or whatever, then we need to, obviously, I'm going to use the word authentic, I've done it, I've broken the seal. But the fact is that we do actually need to make sure that we are transparent and we are authentic when we're talking across to people. Don't try and obfuscate stuff, just be open and honest, and people will actually revere you for it, because these are the issues that people are actually holding quite close to them, and I think we've got to lean into that as brands and marketers. So, moving on to the social media usage stuff, so the stuff that's more specific to us. I think, again, it's down to mobile. The fact that the percentage of active social media users accessing social by mobile is 98%. Basically, it's everyone. So if you are doing anything on social and you're not doing it with us here, then make sure it's all mobile first. And just beast them with that, because that's what they should be doing. So whether that is mobile formats, whether you're tapping into mobile behaviours and so on, that is the beginning, the middle and the end of everything when it comes to social. It's mobile, 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 mobile. And then when you look at the audience profile, this is actually quite surprising, that when you look at the advertising audience, the biggest audience is square in your 25 to 34-year-old bracket here, so millennial heartland. The interesting thing is that 18 to 24-year-olds, there's less of those on social than 35 to 44-year-olds, which is quite an interesting situation to be happening. Now, if you look at age distribution curve for the UK, it runs more like this. So it is skewing younger, following the same shape off the back, but 18 to 24-year-olds are actually lagging a bit behind in terms of the advertising audience, which is quite surprising stats actually. And then in terms of the behaviour once people are actually on the platforms then. So what's quite interesting is that the number of people that are visiting or using social networks in the past month is the same as it was last year, but the active engagement is up 3%, but people's time on the platform is actually going down. So this is a point that we're going to come back to in the panel discussion to understand what's driving some of the behaviour here, which will actually help to create some implications for us as brands and marketers. And then when you look at the most used social platforms, it's running very similar and in line with the global picture. I'm not going to go through it in exhaustive detail. I'm just going to pick out two particular platforms because actually there's some quite interesting stuff within these two. The fact is that Instagram's, when you look at Instagram in terms of its audience overview, it's pretty well been the star performer within the platform rankings and everything. The fact is that their advertising reach in the last year has gone up nearly 5%. That's off a pretty solid base. So it's been a star performer on in the platform rankings, and I think it's just worthwhile pulling out the fact that Instagram is going from strength to strength, and that's probably set to continue over the course of the next year. But then, when you look at Snapchat, I remember when we looked at these data last year, this 4.8% was actually minus 14%. They had a shocker, and it was down to a number of things: platform, UI change, filters and features shifted and stuff like that. But the fact is, they've properly turned it around, and actually they've done a really cracking job in terms of sorting out their advertising reach and shoring up the ship and getting back into growth in terms of their audience view. So that kind of gives you a bit of a flavour of the stuff within the digital report and some UK specific data. Feel free to log on to wearesocial.com/digital-2020 and go and have a luxuriate in all 297 charts and stuff. There's some really great stuff in there that we can all utilise and play with. Now, what we're going to do for the rest of our time this morning is we're going to have a panel discussion. We're very lucky today to have Matt Navarra, industry commentator, Nathan McDonald, co-founder, group CEO of We Are Social, so no pressure on me to ask them bad questions. And unfortunately, but fortunately, Ambrina from Lego unfortunately had to pull out last minute last night. But I know if there's any fanboys and girls out there of Lego, you will be disappointed, but you will not be disappointed by Law, Global Head of Cultural Insights at We Are Social, because you will be delighted by what she has to say behind some of these numbers from a cultural and anthropological perspective this morning. So if I could invite you guys up to the sofa, that would be marvellous. Right, so there's four things that we want to talk about, but what I just wanted to do is just give a quick précis of the heritage and standing that these people have here. So Nathan in particular, as I've said, is obviously the co-founder of We Are Social, but prior to that he was within editorial, content production, digital marketing at agencies including Tribal DUB and MRM worldwide. We've got Matt Navarra, who is an industry commentator, and he's a freelance social media consultant and event speaker as well. Many of you will probably have heard his dulcet tones before. Earlier in his career, he was director of social media at global technology news and events company The Next Web, and he's regularly invited on many popular TV and radio news channels to provide analysis as an industry expert, whether it's News at 10, BBC Breakfast, Good Morning, Sky News, NBC Europe, and others. And then Law, Oxford, is Global Head of Cultural Insights here at We Are Social. She combines academic research methods with a digital-first approach to track culture on a global scale. From socio-political forces shaping people's values and beliefs to the embryo life tensions shaping internet culture. The work is designed to unearth cutting-edge cultural insights that form a springboard for strategy, creative and content. So we've got a pretty stellar cast of people who are here today. So what I wanted to do was literally just show a couple of charts from the data, and then we're going to have a group discussion about each one. And the first is literally time well spent. And that's the fact that what I just talked about here was the fact that engagement on social is up, but time spent is down in the UK. And I suppose I just wanted to ask the guys, why do you think this is the case?
Hi everyone, I've got the mic, so I'll start. I think that there's one thing which is just that if there are more people engaging, then perhaps some of those people are engaging less, and so that drags the average down. So there's sort of a mathematical answer to that. I think the other factor is some of the monitoring tools, time monitoring tools that the platforms introduced. So I think it was mid-2018 that Facebook introduced the time monitor on Instagram and Facebook, so you could get a warning as to how long you've been spending. But it probably lagged a bit in terms of adoption. People downloaded the new version of the app and then started thinking about it. And I think general awareness and kind of social acceptance of spending huge amounts of time staring at the screen in public or with your friends has changed and evolved over the last year. So I think for me those are the headlines as to why that time has dropped. But I think there are a multitude of reasons, so I'll pass the line.
Nice. Hard to follow. So yeah, I think you're totally right. I think there are a ton of different reasons that this kind of stuff is happening. From a cultural perspective, I think in the past year, the last kind of 5 years, but certainly especially in the last year, we've seen a real kind of assessment of how we want to spend our time on the internet, right? A kind of rebalancing. And I was actually reading there's an anthropologist at the Oxford Internet Institute who does a lot of stuff around digital wellness. And she went and did a huge study at a digital detox camp, like one of the adult summer camps in the US. And the biggest thing that came out of it was that she was talking about how this rebalancing in the media is very much painted as about being about mental health, about personal health, about literal, physical, and kind of mental health of people. But she was saying in these camps what she was finding was that actually it was the social and cultural harm around social media and what kind of that might be causing. So, you know, if you really believe in democracy, how can you be a Facebook user, all the way through to if you're family oriented, how can you use your phone at the dinner table? And how I think in the last couple of years we're really seeing people start to assess where they want digital to play a role in their life from a values perspective. Against this backdrop, we've seen things like screen time become something that you can virtually signal. So if you search screen time on Twitter, you'll see one person post something which is like, oh, I only spent an hour and 30 minutes on Instagram this week, and then loads of other people will try and one up underneath. And so against that backdrop, it makes sense that people would only be going onto the social platforms when they were actually posting or actually looking to engage with the person. And then instead of just mindlessly scrolling, maybe they're spending more time, you know, reading books. I don't know.
I have no idea.
Always the worst to be last on the panel with questions. But
you're first next time. Keep holding the mic.
I'm going to hold on to it. No, I think just echoing what the others have said really, that this stuff to do with people's relationship with the internet and social media has evolved quite dramatically over the last couple of years with the things that have been going on. I think also that we saw somewhere on the charts about the fact that some of the younger demographic is actually spending far less time on online as well, on social media. And I think there's a piece around the fact that there's a lot of education work that's also going on with schools now. I've been around lots of different community projects in schools, and there's a lot of discussion around educating children around how to use social media and how to have a healthier relationship with it. So I think if you combine that with some of the things that we said, and the fact that we've seen in the news this narrative telling us all about these concerns and the links to mental health conditions and things, I think that bringing that all together is probably what we're seeing here in the result.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting when you look at all of those things. Well, what do we, what should we be doing as brands then if people are embarking on all of these sorts of behaviours? What's the implication?
Yeah, I think brands that now, more than ever, I think have got to consider themselves and to be, really setting the standard of being, ethical and having that kind of being conscious of people and much more savvy around what brands are doing and how they're encouraging certain behaviours or what they're doing in terms of the activities with their campaigns. So I think it's more about being conscious of the fact that more than ever before there's a hypersensitivity to kind of use of social media, and I think that the regulatory stuff that we're hearing that's coming out and stuff to do with some of the data concerns, all of those things, people are really conscious of how they use their time, and also they're also battling to kind of all the different platforms. We've still got this horrible buzzword coming up, attention economy. People are still kind of considering how they use these platforms more cautiously, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that you just said. I think on top of that, I think it's definitely more of a problem for some brands than others. If you look at, especially media brands as well, like people like Netflix, obviously the home of binge watching, there's going to be a lot of stuff around there about kind of being more attentive to how your platform might be encouraging unhealthy digital behaviours across the board. Even stuff like they have a show out called Next in Fashion at the moment, and at the end of every show it's got they have basically Alexa Chung and Tan from Queer Eye. And they're like, click next, watch next now. And I feel like that kind of behaviour won't last very long for brands. Like, they won't be able to encourage that kind of behaviour. But in terms of social specifically and like mobile usage, I think it's going beyond the digital detox. People don't want to be told to put their phones down. They'll put their phones down when they want to put their phones down. And I think increasingly we're just going to have to get more nuanced with our communications about how we encourage people to be healthy.
Yeah, excellent points. I think the only point I would add is that if you're a brand that has a role in people's offline life, real life, the blur between real life and online life, I don't know if that exists anymore. But if you have a role in the off-screen or offline world, then just champion that. If you've got a genuine role to play in people's lives, then that's a great thing to shout about. As Lord said, if you're a media brand, it's a bit more challenging. If you're YouTube, how do you then deal with that? But you can also have content about things to do whilst you're not on YouTube, perhaps. I would argue about Netflix though. Does that fit into, because that can be a social activity, watching Netflix with your family or your friends. So I don't know if it fits into the same category and the same concerns about well-being and mental health exist.
I think that's such a great point, and I think that's something that in kind of encouraging more healthy usage, it's about understanding where media plays a role in relationships. Because I think, so say for example all of these like which Disney character filters are you filters that were around over Christmas, that was a tool to like have fun with your grandma, like, or have fun with the family at the dinner table. Like, not all social and media usage has to be negative. I don't think it all has to have a negative impact. And kind of understanding what role social platforms and media platforms can play in offline and in relationships, which are really at the core of human existence, without getting that deep that quick. But I think that's kind of the best way to win.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting what you're saying, because I suppose what it comes down to is that you've got to contribute to the communities and the cultural behaviours as opposed to necessarily interrupting them. I suppose is what we've got to do. Right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that we've seen many examples of brands kind of catching on to this change in people's belief and use of social media, and then jumping on with a campaign that really doesn't stand up against what they've previously done, or they haven't done anything in 10 years prior about something that's really ethical and moral, and things then suddenly diving headlong in there because it's flavour of the month. So things we've seen many years before in other issues. So I just think it's be very cautious about jumping on the bandwagon with this kind of stuff.
Very true. Okay, so next topic, the rise of Reddit. So it's quite interesting because when you look at the data, you look at where Reddit is, you go, well, I don't really need to worry about Reddit because it's only down at sort of 430 million people globally, which obviously sounds ridiculously trite in this company, but the fact is that when you're looking at social platforms, that Reddit, you go, well, it's not one of the top ones, so why would I even want to bother with it? I think the interesting thing here is what we've seen over the last year is its rise in users is up, and its reach is up 30%, which is huge. But then you combine that with the fact that the number of people that are commenting and posting on Reddit is up 37%. And you couple that with the fact that they obviously talk about themselves being the front page of the internet and everything, and suddenly you go, well, hang on, Reddit is really rising and pretty quickly. What should I or could I be doing with Reddit? So I suppose my question to you guys is, well, what do you think we should be doing with Reddit, or should we be bricking it or what?
I used to be scared of Reddit when I was at the Next Web, Because I think it was many years ago, it was 2013, and at the time Reddit was still kind of the place that was super geeky with social media. Kind of, if you were playing around in there, that's kind of where it all started, and played around in there. But they started to make a lot more effort in 2015 onwards to get media companies and publishers to start using the platform and having some sort of presence on the platform. But I think you have to be a sort of brave social media manager, even now, to kind of start thinking about doing campaigns within Reddit. But they have spent a huge amount of time, money and effort in terms of improving the app quality you can use there, making it more accessible to media and publishers, and generally tidying up the place. Because I'd be interested to know what the breakdown is in terms of the growth areas of the topics of discussion and in terms of which communities, because we know over the last couple of years that there was certainly a Donald Trump area of Reddit that certainly was very active, and so I'd be curious about that. And I think it still remains a tricky place for brands to play, because it's still controlled and run pretty much by mods in these communities. I don't know if you've ever tried to engage with a lovely mod from one of the subreddits, but they're not particularly keen for you to kind of come and jump into their community and do stuff, which is pretty fair, because any brand that kind of joins a subreddit and then suddenly is using that community to kind of sell themselves, sell the companies, it's just, you're going to get in so much trouble. Don't do that. Not Reddit. So I still think it remains a tricky place. I do think there's a huge amount of potential there, and it is easier than it ever has been to sort of dive into Reddit. But I still think you have to be a certain type of experienced and slightly brave social media manager to play with Reddit still now.
I'm going to be that annoying person that kind of answers your question in a roundabout way. So I want to talk about how I don't feel like this number is particularly surprising in terms of. So last year when we did our fraud report, one of the behaviours around overt privacy, and it was kind of stemming off the back of last year, Mark Zuckerberg at FA said that the future is private, and it wasn't private like dark social, but private as in groups. And I feel like, if Facebook was, what was it initially, like the town square? That's what I've always described it as. And it's like everyone's a bit sick of the town square and they want to go back into their houses sometimes, or they want to go and hang out with their friends in like a place where there are just people like them. And I feel like against this backdrop we're seeing a lot of these kind of private communities which aren't as private as dark social and aren't as public as the feed. But we're seeing it on, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Discord. So Discord is kind of like, so if you use Slack or Facebook Workplace, Discord is kind of like a free version of that, but basically, so Hypebeast has a server on Discord which has a load of chats where people can just talk about men's fashion predominantly. And it was originally designed for gamers so they could talk around certain games and talk in game, but now it's kind of seeding out into the wider public. And I think, again, these are places where you can go and find like-minded people, but still in a kind of private, regulated space. And that Reddit was the original version of this, well, if you don't count like online forums. So it makes total sense that we're here now. But I think with that in mind, the whole point is that these communities have to remain run by the people in the communities. So it's not about being a brand and turning up and being like, hey, can I have some fans? Because that's not how it works, so it has to have a purpose. And so we actually did something, I think, I really don't want to get the details of this wrong, but we did a partnership with the Holocaust Museum on a Memorial Day.
It was Holocaust Memorial Day.
Yeah, and basically anyone who was denying the Holocaust, we basically did a partnership with the Holocaust Museum to do, I guess it was like a bot where it would basically shitpost under anyone who said the Holocaust didn't happen, being like, yes it did, here's the Wikipedia entry, here's all of the information that you need to make an informed decision. And so that was an amazing activation because it had a point of view in the conversation, and I think that's the only way you can win on Reddit. And I don't actually know from a charity perspective and from a social purpose perspective that is really effective, but I don't actually know necessarily how a brand could do that in the same way.
I think that raises quite an interesting point, because I suppose publishers are doing stuff on Reddit. They're publishers. Charity has the opportunity to do it by rubbing up against different opinions and things to gain some kind of traction. But from a brand perspective, it's potentially still quite fraught with danger.
Yeah, I think it is. I think the key is to remember that you need to add some value to the community. If you're not adding any value, then don't go there at all. If you've got some relevance to the conversation and you can add some value, then it's worth thinking about how to engage, but don't just jump in without really thinking through the pros and cons, potential negative outcomes. And if you've got anything to hide, if you're not a very kind of squeaky clean transparent brand, then be extra careful because everything gets found out on the internet eventually, right? I think there's a potential for some brands who perhaps have celebrities associated with them, or CEOs that have particular gravitas to get involved from a personal point of view with the Ask Me Anything format. So if you have that kind of charismatic or celebrity person attached to your brand, then that can be a way to perhaps attract attention. But if that person goes onto the forum and starts talking about the company and the brand and starts selling, then that would be a disaster. It would be actually really honest and truthful per the kind of rules of the game.
Yeah, I think that I'd agree with that. I think there's two other things that we've kind of used Reddit for, and that's in terms of understanding cultural behaviours, what's going on in and around certain interests and things. So you actually use it as an insight generation and community understanding tool as much as a communication platform. So we will use it a lot to understand what's bubbling away in Reddit and ultimately going to then pop out in social at some point in the future. So certainly in the past it's been almost like the engine room of social. I know that it's shifted slightly in recent years, but using it to understand the communities you're trying to connect with in terms of insight and understanding is one particular thing. I suppose the other thing is so we've got clients where we've ended up actually having community managers part of those communities, recognising that it's been agreed with the mods and there are rules of engagement on what you can and can't say as a community manager within those groups. So if you're helping people to circumnavigate an issue or something, so let's say if it's a computer game or something, just letting people know how to get around the problem that they're experiencing or whatever, as long as that community manager is contributing to that conversation, as Nathan was saying, that is another way that you can use it. It isn't necessarily always about a campaign approach to using Reddit.
A customer service approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's Reddit, unless anybody else has anything else to add. Okay, excellent. Right, so let's talk TikTok. Everybody's grinning because everybody's here about TikTok. No? Okay. Anyway, the interesting thing about TikTok is, I suppose we get clients talking to us pretty well daily going, what do we do with TikTok? Do we need to do TikTok? Can we have TikTok? So we thought we'd have a little chat about it. Now, the interesting thing is here, this is why everybody's going, shit, we've got to talk about TikTok. It's number 5 in the app rankings for mobile downloads in the UK, right? So those people are downloading it, and it's on their phones. Active users, where is it? So it's quite an interesting thing that loads of people have got it on their phones, but not many people are actually using it. But then you look at it and you go, well, it's right down the bottom, so why should I do anything with TikTok? It's like beware the shiny thing. But actually, should we be ignoring it? What should we be doing?
I don't think we should ignore it at all, because the growth rate has been incredible. And I think it's actually, it's not social media, it's social entertainment. It's a slightly different category of app than we have seen and that we're used to using. So if you think about it in those terms, then how can we learn from it, and how can we leverage some of the behaviours and some of the things that we see? So I think it's a really rich place to learn about some of the key trends that are going on in the world. So that's probably a good intro.
Before you pass on the mic, because obviously you've spent a lot of time out east. What makes TikTok so popular in
East London?
Yeah. So what makes it so popular out in China?
Well, I think so if you're not aware of the the numbers that there are 800 million people that use TikTok. I think 500 million are in China, and another large percentage are in India. And it's difficult to kind of talk about those two markets in the same way because they are so different. Obviously, the social media ecosystem in China is vastly different, and TikTok competes with a totally different set of apps and networks there. But what those two markets do have in common is very high amounts of mobile usage of internet. So of internet time, people spend I think more than half of the internet time in both those markets is on mobile. It's lower than that in the UK and many Western markets. So they're mobile-first countries. I think the other thing about it is TikTok has a very lo-fi aesthetic, and in both those countries you have literally billions of people, so massive populations, not all of whom can afford to make their lives and their lifestyles look as glamorous as they need to be on Instagram or those other channels. So if you think about TikTok as being truly kind of democratic in that, or meritocratic in that you just have to have a catchy idea for a tune, a song, a meme, you can appear on TikTok. And it doesn't have to look polished and beautiful. You don't have to make your life look glamorous. And for the billions of people in the tier 2, tier 3 cities in China and India, that's very, very appealing. To have access to something, and I think the other thing is that it's not about a network in that your influence doesn't. Of course, you can have followers on TikTok, but actually, it's more about the quality of what you put on there. The quality can catch hold, and anyone with only a few followers can become mega famous on TikTok overnight.
To follow on from that, I think those 2 points are kind of linked in a way in terms of you referring to it as social entertainment. I think in both India and in China, because so in India I think it was 2016 where Reliance Jio made internet basically accessible to everyone, which previously wasn't a thing, right? So the internet usage and the emergence of smartphones has dovetailed pretty perfectly with the rise of TikTok. And this means that watching entertainment on mobile is the primary way that people are accustomed to using it, right? On top of that, so I think that's also why it's so much more popular in those markets. But then also on top of that, you've got this notion of social mobility, which I think really taps into a kind of entrepreneurial spirit of young people here as well, where like the users in India, I'm not really sure about China, but the users in India are mostly 18 to 35-year-olds in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So these are people that are earning literally $350 a month and see TikTok as a potential springboard, like it's a side hustle that could have huge implications, almost like a random event of like kind of additional fame. But then in terms of here, why we shouldn't ignore it, I think there are two kind of key points here. Firstly, I don't want to talk about Lil Nas X anymore because I know you all know about him, but he is kind of the archetypal reason that, or kind of archetypal case study in how TikTok is influencing culture beyond itself. AirPods, famous because of TikTok. Lizzo, Tree Hurts, famous because of TikTok. Lil Nas X, like all of these kind of massive cultural phenomena from the last year, all of which became famous with TikTok memes. So there's that side of it, and there's the side of it which is around the fact that that it's the emerging counterculture. Like, we talked about how Instagram is up 4.8%, and Instagram is a sea of increasingly homogenous content, right? And TikTok's come along with all of these incredible tools and different ways to do things, and it's a backlash against that aesthetic, that polished perfection, the pressure to be perfect. And I think against that backdrop, we're already seeing the aesthetic of TikTok filter into Instagram stories. And I think next year, I know, don't quote me on this if it doesn't happen, but next year we should see that number rise. I hope. If not, I'm fired. So.
Yeah, I think TikTok was the second most asked thing of me in the last 6 to 12 months, shortly followed by teaching how to get verified on Twitter, which is still going on. So in terms of TikTok, my daughter who's 10, all she wants to be is either YouTube famous, but now it's not YouTube famous, it's TikTok famous. That's what she wants now. And I think we echoed some of the things that the others have said really. There's a low barrier to entry for creators to jump in there and to experiment. So I think that plays a part of it. I think we also need to remember that TikTok, or its the company behind it, ByteDance, they've spent a lot of money to try and get people on that platform. They've been not ashamed of going into Instagram and blitzing it and saying, hey, come over here, it's a great party, come join us. So they're not bothered about that. So a lot of the usage is coming. That's why there's been a high turnover of active users. So there's loads of people downloading it, and then there's a load of other people that suddenly just disappear, and it that cycle's been happening quite a lot. But I think this is the thing that is the shiny new thing. I think certainly a lot of clients are wanting to sort of stick, a little bit of money there and play around with it as well. It's just a question for brands now as to how best to use TikTok. A lot of people initially were sort of jumping in there with a brand account and doing what you would do on any other new platform as a brand. I think a better strategy at the moment is to actually get involved with people who are actually native to the platform and popular on the platform and collaborating with them rather than setting up your own kind of brand Pepsi account and then jumping in and doing something from you like that. I think the authenticity, buzzword again, is part of that reason as well. But I think overall, is it a flash in the pan? No, it's not a flash in the pan. And I think the fact that we're seeing a whole range of short form video apps just suddenly blitzing coming onto the market. We've seen Byte, which has come online in the last few weeks, which is from the creators of buying. We've seen there's Fireweb, which is an app that Google was talking about buying. And there's other apps as well that are in the background that are all about short form video. So I think this year is going to be an interesting year for brand advertisers in terms of how they leverage that kind of shorter form content and get into that kind of community as well.
Yeah, I think also there's that other behaviour where people are using the functionality of TikTok and then proliferating that content outside of the platform. Is that set to continue, do you think?
We've seen this before with the likes of Facebook and particularly Snapchat, where they were quite happy and it was a good strategy for them to get people to be aware of the platform, to help make it as easy as possible to share out from the platform, and got the watermark of the product there as well. The question will be, will they maintain that, or will that something in years to come, if it sticks with the kind of growth it's got, they will suddenly sort of remove the ability to make it as easy to kind of share out, and you'll be locked into that ecosystem. But certainly it makes sense for me that as a new platform, trying to get as many people on there as quickly as possible, but getting out and making it easy to share out to the platform is kind of a key part of that strategy, I think.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is I agree. Even now, like when I use it, there was even like a couple of months ago, there was a feature where you could just download the video, and it felt so like lo-fi in a way where I was like, there's no way this is going to last. And lo and behold, it's already kind of gone. So I think kind of as they start to become more legitimised, the sharing, sadly, will probably become more difficult. It'll become like, with Instagram, where you can't even like look at it without logging in on your browser now. I think it'll probably start to get more locked down like that too.
Okay, so let's move on to our final topic. Spend. So what's quite interesting is when we were looking at the data, the amount of spend on media ads in 2019 was actually pretty healthy. Quite a lot of cash going into paid social within the UK. That in itself isn't a particularly interesting number. The interesting number is the fact that that's a 20% growth on the previous year. I think that's quite a significant shift, and potentially one that will continue this year. I suppose, to the panel, why do you think this is the case?
I think it's a variety of reasons. One of them is the increasing sophistication of the tools, targeting tools that the platforms are providing. But I also think you have a fundamental shift in the business models that are existing. So there are so many more direct-to-consumer brands that really are native to social media. They're probably also using some search ads, but primarily their brand building activity happens on social. And so as these brands become more and more, there's more and more of them, they start to compete with one another, they have to advertise more. And once you kind of show an interest in one, you then start being advertised to by all the others. So I think there's a sort of a snowballing that's happening with some of these direct-to-consumer brands that have particularly deep pockets, because they're funded by VCs. They've got very big kind of expense accounts or marketing accounts to try and grow and grab market share. So that's one of the reasons, I think, is sort of fundamental kind of business models that are happening around the internet. On top of that, you have the app ecosystem and brands like TikTok spending money to acquire users. A lot of gaming apps spend money to acquire users. So there is a huge amount of customer acquisition and performance marketing that I think is driving a lot of that growth.
I think on top of that, I guess the kind of evolution of social platforms as pure play like e-commerce tools is also probably kind of driving this, because I did some research with some teenagers for one of our clients last year, and it was insane how many of them just do use Instagram in particular as a shopping platform, as in like, so we did the interviews just before Christmas, and they were all like they'd all save their Christmas list that they could just forward to their parents in a folder on their Instagram saves, and then they were just forwarding it to their parents who were buying it in the platform. So I think as we're getting to that stage, I think last year pretty much every single platform introduced or upgraded the kind of shopping tools they have. I think there's probably a bigger return on investment, because if people see your brand on Instagram and then immediately put that product in their basket from the editorial content they see and then buy it, it kind of makes sense to be there. One of the kids actually said, Instagram is basically QVC now, the shopping channel, and I was like, oh, right. He's so right. We did that.
Yeah, I think, again, echoing the points that the rest of the panel said, really, but I think the barriers to entry in terms of using social for advertising and marketing is low as it's ever been, and continues to become much easier for small to medium-sized companies to start diving in there and experimenting and do things that maybe they hadn't tried before. So that's one factor of it. I think also the fact that there's quite a high amount of innovation, particularly with Instagram in the last year, in terms of features and functions that enable advertisers and creators to do things quicker, easier, cheaper, and with much more impact than they've ever been able to do before. So there's that as well. Excuse me. And then I also think that the fact that the ability to understand what the return on the investment that you're putting in there, one of the things that every social media manager I've ever come into is like, how do I prove to my boss that social is worth it, I'm going to keep my job? And proving that social is giving you benefit back to the business, whether it's conversions, sales, whatever it is, and tracking it and understanding the numbers and being better at understanding analytics of social and social commerce. I think that also has increased. So I think there's more confidence in allocating budget to those sorts of things. So I can see that trend continuing quite dramatically for the next few years.
I think that's quite an interesting point though, because I suppose the ROI issue is pretty, it's just always there, isn't it? I think the challenge that we've always had in the past is that social hasn't been able to hold itself accountable as much as other channels, because there isn't you can't necessarily power econometrics, because the media money isn't enough in social compared to TV, outdoor, and so on and so forth. I think the platforms are getting better at helping us work out brand uplift and stuff like that, but I think it's the accountability in terms of social commerce that is actually going to help more than anything else. I think media agencies tend to talk the language of efficiency, but our clients hold us to account in terms of efficacy, and it becomes quite a difficult thing to kind of navigate as a consequence. I think the swipe up to land on a landing page or whatever is starting to help in terms of those conversion metrics, but actually how do you measure the brand value in the same way that you would with traditional media? I think this year is going to be quite an interesting year where we start to look at new methodologies of measuring effectiveness, to be honest.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see now a lot of these platforms bringing out the ability to do everything in one place. So the sort of having the checkout being able to purchase the product at the time you're wanting to think, thinking about a purchase decision. Once that more of the platforms come on stream with that, and they're able to have the whole customer experience, the whole journey from beginning to end through one platform. There's no moving off to a website and buying it separately. I think that again will help reinforce the value that they're getting from these platforms, and so that will just keep on snowballing, as you say, with this kind of growth in use of social.
Okay, so there are some questions that have come in through this Slido thing. So I'm just going to read out a couple and let's see how we go. So first one is, WhatsApp is massive in the UK. How can brands use it?
Good question. So WhatsApp at the moment is like many of these messaging apps and dark social. It's that back to ROI and knowing how to kind of infiltrate some of these communities. I think one of the things that a lot of certainly publishers have used WhatsApp for, but then they've kind of had to stop for a while because they've changed the rules, was to use it as a way of building a community around a particular topic or around their brand as well. I still think that is a terrific thing to do, but for a lot of businesses at the moment, certainly what WhatsApp seems to be pushing on is more about the customer service aspect of WhatsApp in terms of having it as a way, whether it's Messenger, WhatsApp, whatever, to engage with your consumers. So they're already having their purchase decision and completing that purchase online. They kind of would expect them to want to be able to do all their customer service online. And so I think the elements of kind of WhatsApp feeds more for me into a customer service role rather than anything else. But there is potential to grow a community around it, but the limitations that WhatsApp has in terms of how you do that with brands still in its infancy, I would say.
I think it comes down to, if you say that the feed is the town square and the Reddit is the bar, then like WhatsApp is like your house. And so in terms of brands being there, you have to be serving a purpose. That has to just be a reason you're there. And so whether or not it's customer service, there's an amazing travel brand called Trippin, which does like a WhatsApp broadcast, and they basically send you all of the exhibitions and shows and interesting things that go on in London or in your city every week on like a Friday. So again, it's like serving a purpose. The people who run that brand are achingly cool, so you trust that they know what's going on in their city. And again, it serves a real purpose. So I think, was it Facebook that, have they just decided, there was some news in the week, I think, about how Facebook has cut down its attempts to try and get advertising into WhatsApp. I think that was earlier this week, or maybe last week. And so I think that's a really good move, because I think brands being in that space where they're not wanted will do more harm than good.
I think if your product is information, then it's a great place to share that information. So if you're a publisher, or like you've got a list of recommendations that you're pushing out, then it's a fantastic channel for that, because it's very personal. And it can just be adapted from other content publishing strategies that you might have on Twitter, on other more public platforms. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think another one for brands that have superfans is to think about superfan communities. So it doesn't have to be broadcast, it can also involve a peer-to-peer element. So if you want to kind of create or curate even a kind of collection of superfans to talk about your brand amongst themselves, to mine them for insight, to ask them for questions, then that's really quite interesting, because it is private, it is exclusive, and it's very personal.
Yeah, I think there's also WhatsApp for businesses. It's that customer service angle, isn't it? WhatsApp for business is all about just answering customer queries, and there's also the functionality about brand. You can have brand catalogs on there that people are able to look at, and then you've got direct access to sales stuff. So customer service feels like a sort of natural place for it to kind of sit as well. So bearing in mind we've talked about social commerce to a degree and messenger apps, what else? It feels like in the past we've always looked towards the US and tech companies in the US for what's coming next, but it feels like Zuckerberg is kind of plundering the East. What do we think we can learn from platforms in and around China?
That's a good question. Well, one aspect of the platforms in the East is they're for a start, you have WeChat, which is a sort of super app. There's almost nothing you can't do in WeChat, and it's central to the lives of everyone in China. It's very difficult to even catch the tube if you don't have a WeChat account. It's quite hard to pay in cash and get a ticket. Just to give you an example. I think one of the things that sort of niche apps that have come out of the East is that they're very fun. They're often very light-hearted. They involve kind of face filters, or involve something that is actually fun in your network. So that's one thing, is to be perhaps we're seeing apps be a little less serious coming out of the East. So either very functional or very fun.
Anything to add, anybody else?
I guess my thing with all of this is that, I mean, I think there's a hugely useful element of looking to apps in and around China as a kind of early warning system for the kind of things that might end up getting big here. But then at the same time, like WeChat, for example, given like the regulation that Facebook has faced, not even really as that much of an integrated platform, apps like WeChat, I don't think would survive here in the UK or in the US, just because of a difference in the kind of societies that we live in. And so I think with that in mind, it's always risky to look to apps in and around that area for anything more than, I guess, kind of inspiration about what could work here. And I think always applying them to the kind of cultural context of different societies is super important.
Do you have anything?
I have nothing to add.
Excellent. This is a very efficient panel here. Okay, so is it realistic that brands will ever encourage people to use their screens less, especially when more dwell time is often seen as a positive metric?
I think it wouldn't surprise me if some brands incorrectly or inappropriately try to kind of jump onto that, as we were talking about earlier, in terms of kind of like showing themselves to be kind of responsible and doing it in a way that isn't kind of, I'm trying to think of another word that's not authentic, but it is, that's not one coming to my mind, but genuine, that's it. So I think that it would be very tempting for a brand to do that. I think there are certain brands that can get away with it, and I think it is good for, I think it's a positive step that brands jump in and do things like that, but I'm just concerned that we're going to see a lot of that over the next year or so. I think there are some that have tried it. I think there was famously Pepsi jumped on something a couple of years ago with one of the Kardashians or something, I think, and that went, very bad for them. And I think there's just too many examples of that. So I just don't think there's many angles for most brands to be able to kind of leverage the screen time thing, other than to be seen themselves to behave in a responsible way. It's quite a very specific thing for a campaign. It's all about dwell time and campaign, kind of looking at apps and using them less.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that, screens aren't bad. Don't tell people when they should and shouldn't be using them. I just don't think that it makes sense for us as brands to be telling people how to live their lives and what relationship they should be having with technology.
Yeah, I agree it shouldn't be preachy. I suppose the one caveat I would add is that there's nothing wrong with quality over quantity. So if you can think about the quality of your engagements that, as a brand that you might have versus the quantity, then that's something to think about.
I suppose there's one example that we had as an agency where we were working with a client. We had phones down for Father's Day, and actually the engagement that we garnered with that campaign and the conversation was actually pretty significant and very positive, particularly from a telco company. So there are ways that you can leverage it. It's just making sure that you're not doing it in a particularly trite way or in a tokenistic way. So I think you've got to follow through with the way that you, with the demonstrating the behaviour that you're asking people to exert. If you're just badging something, then it's going to be a bloody nightmare, quite frankly. Okay, so last question. I'm conscious of time. Thank you very much for not wriggling too much, everybody in your seats. So I'm going to ask one last question, and it's just basically just for shits and giggles, really. So for each of the panelists, if you were a brand and you were only able to market on one channel, what would that channel be and why? Law Oxford.
Do you know what? Before this came up, I was adamant that it was TikTok. But then I realised that actually, despite the fact I would like to be 17, I am actually not. So, and I feel like a lot of the social motivations that underpin TikTok are something which is unique to a generation which is born up having never had social media. So, I'm going to go left field and say MySpace.
Bloody hell, how old are you?
Bring back Google Plus, that's what I'm doing. No, for me, I think putting it all together, MySpace. Google Plus, yeah. I think Instagram is the obvious choice for most brands in 2020 in terms of if you're going to pick a winner and have something it's not necessarily just because it's a safe bet, which is not necessarily what all brands will want at this time. I just think we've seen so much growth in the last 2 years it's still a hugely popular platform. It's navigating as best it can do with all the others around this, the toxicity stuff. I think it's done as good a job as it can do with Mark Zuckerberg playing around in there. But I think also the social commerce features, this year we're really going to see a huge shift now. We've laid the groundwork in terms of the stories functionality and making sort of product tags and product buttons, all that kind of stuff. Now we're going to see the sort of transactional stuff to do checkout and making it a much more seamless end-to-end experience. So I think that for me would make it the platform for me for choice this year.
You definitely got the cheekbones for it. Hashtag no filter.
So MySpace will raise you a friend feed. Friend feed. And there's Friendster. Yeah. Any options to now define social media platforms. I'm torn between saying, actually I won't be on TikTok because it's fun, it's definitely genuine, it's real, as opposed to what Instagram is becoming, which is a bit of a mole, not very authentic, it's too polished. But then I was thinking, should it be that, or should it just be really sort of corporate and professional and LinkedIn? I don't know.
Why LinkedIn?
Well, some brands are B2B brands and they live on LinkedIn. And so I suppose, we're an agency, we work with brands, so that kind of fits, but I think we're also very young and cool and hip. Not that I'm young and cool and hip, but we collectively are social out of that, so TikTok. So, I'm a bit schizophrenic about it, I don't know. Maybe we need a
TikTok during the week, TikTok on weekends.
Yeah, or maybe we need to start putting TikTok videos on our LinkedIn feed.
I think we do that. Nice one. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, everybody, for coming today. And that's a wrap.